Hey guys, this is Calm. I'm doing a 15-0 commentary of Fusion's game. He is black against Alec K. 1736 rating. Fusion is 1811 E. I'm not sure what that means. I think it means it's slightly out of date. And the opening's going very quickly, so I'm just going to kind of go through that at my own pace, as it will slow down at some point. So it's a long game. So e4, c5, we've got Sicilian. Then we have this 2 knight c6 move order, which I really like because I play the accelerated dragon quite a bit. So it means that after d4 we can either go into the Sveshnikov, like Fusion's playing here, or we can go into that after takes and just g6 here. I like it because it's quite adaptable, and it means that if we're learning something, say as a group, against 3 bishop b5, we can play the same thing, because we've got the same first two moves. Against 3 bishop b5, I just play g6, and it's, I think it's a good line. So as it is, we have mainline Sveshnikov, it seems. Bishop e2 now. I can't really remember exactly the theory. I don't think bishop e2 is normal though. I think normally it's bishop g5 first with the idea of knight d5, but it'll probably transpose. So Fusion played a6, which is a normal thing to push this knight away, because after that we're able to play b5 and we get more expansion in. We're also threatening to play b4 and fork the knights. If we manage to get this knight to move, e4 hangs. But so knight d5 is usually played so to get out of this, because there's no real other nice way to deal with it, and that's been played. And this is now live for the game, so it's Fusion's move. So yeah. So the first thing to note is that e4 is hanging. But the problem I can see with taking that is that, bishop f3 would hit the knight, and then if this knight moves, we have this knight moving, and this hits this. So we'd be able to take the knight with check and pick up the rook as well. So after taking e4, basically after bishop f3, you have to be able to play f5, I think, to support that. But as white has spent no time at all, I'm imagining it must be some kind of known opening trap for him, especially since he follows up immediately on the continuation. So he must know what he's doing, I guess. I'm not completely familiar with it, if I'm honest, so I guess we'll see it in action now. I mean, after f5, bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight, you can have moves like queen h5 with check, but then we just answer with g6. So I'm not so sure what that accomplishes, so I think there must be some other kind of follow-up that we're going to see. I think it could also just be that white doesn't particularly know his move orders, and he played this bishop e2 before the bishop g5 by mistake, because obviously in this other line when we played knight d5, you wouldn't be able to take on e4 because this would be pinned. But I guess we'll see. The other option instead of f5 is bishop f5, but f5 is a pretty common move in the Sveshnikov anyway, so I wouldn't be shying away from it. Also, the advantages of it is after something like bishop e7 castles, we can then push f4, and then whenever we decide to develop this bishop, we haven't kind of blockaded our attack on the white king by putting the bishop in front of the pawn. Also on c8 it's just generally quite good, because after this f5 move, if we ever get in this f4, we can then play g4, g5 as well for some big attack, and the bishop is actually quite well positioned on c8 because it covers you know, all these backward squares without having to move and block up these other squares for the pieces. Bishop e3 has been played. A trick behind this bishop e3 can be we're playing bishop b6 next. And obviously once the queen moves, as it's under attack by the bishop and we can't take the bishop because this knight supports it, you're then able to play knight c7 check. So I'd imagine that the response is just going to be, you know, rook b8 here from fusion. Or obviously we could just take on b6 next. And if you have something... Well, I was going to say if there's something to do with bishop a7, then you could have, you know, obviously just taken that with the c6 knight. So bishop e6 was played kind of somewhat quickly by fusion, but he is still behind 3 minutes on the clock, so he'll want to be playing a bit quicker, I guess. And he's kind of walked into this bishop e6, so I'm not quite sure what he was planning here, because obviously we don't have time to take the knight first, because obviously our queen would fall and we're not attacking whites. So that could be a bit awkward. It's also not like we have the option of just playing queen b8 or something and then allowing the capture of this rook, because we can't take this bishop and trap the knight in, because this knight actually defends b6 after taking on a8. So I feel like maybe fusion just missed that. When you're playing games, I always try and think what was the reason that my opponent played that move, and that basically allows me to see these upcoming, you know, ideas very quickly, because they're the first thing I look at. I don't look at what my plan is, I think about that later. I immediately think of what was the threat created by their last move. So yeah, it looks like fusion's going to have to give the exchange, but the game is still very much up in the air since we won this pawn early on. So, you know, we have some compensation for it. We're also going to have likely a big attack on the king's side, to the point where it may actually be worth white castling queen's side, but then he has to deal with the quick b and a pawns, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. As is, I think you want to play queen c8 here, because if we play queen b8 and then knight c7 check, well, I guess it's kind of up to you. I mean, basically, after knight c7 check, this bishop hangs as well, so it may be useful to have the queen to recapture here, but at the same time, if he takes that, we would be able to take b8 here, and then maybe the knight's getting trapped himself over here. Because after take c6, it's like the only good square is g4, and that's covered by the knight. But after bishop takes, pawn takes, we have bishop e7 next move, and then again, this knight doesn't really have very many good squares. It kind of has to go to h3. Because, you know, f3 would be blocked by the e4 pawn, but then again, maybe it can take e4, so yeah. So, I mean, we're just thinking on fusion's time here. Generally, in 15-minute games, I have this problem whereby I spend too much time in the opening, but then it does mean that I play the opening correctly. So I generally don't get into too many tough spots. If you play it too fast, you have the problem that you can lose material and then the game's pretty much over anyway, so it's not that beneficial to have more time. It can lead to a lot of time scrambles, but I kind of feel like that's more beneficial than getting in many, you know, games where we're lost with lots of time. Because whenever we're practicing, we kind of want to improve our game anyway, and if we're spending time in the opening, it means that we're going to learn the opening more, and be more aware of these potential traps that can come up, because we've kind of seen them on the board. So yeah, I think Fusion's spending a bit too long here. Basically, his only options are Queen C8 or Queen B8, as far as I can see. And I don't think there's particularly too much difference between them, which doesn't mean that it doesn't matter which one he plays. It's just that the difference between the moves is probably quite small, so it's probably not worth spending like a third of our time on it. But yeah, what would be nice for you? It's kind of interesting that you went to D7 there. I'd have probably gone to F7, I think. Maybe he is gonna. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, I'd have gone to F7 just because it's a slightly safer spot. I don't like putting our king immediately on the same line as the queen. But yeah, I would say one of the main ideas for Fusion here is that he's going to try and take advantage of his pawn center. And if he can get in D5 before White is able to play a move like C4 to kind of break it up, then I think he could have a lot of play for the material. Because I was thinking of that D5 plan, I think the king would be better positioned on F7 there, because if we're pushing the D pawn, we don't want to be in a pin, kind of thing. As it is with castling, I think we can maybe push G5, G4 pretty quickly. We may want to even retreat this knight to keep material on, or play something like Knight G5, which hits the bishop. Threaten E4. It's kind of unclear. We can at least mess up White's pawn structure by playing D5 and taking on A3 at some point. Probably after waiting for White to play C3 himself, or he's threatening to move the knight. It's not something we have to do immediately. So D5 is played. And now C3 is played, so I think even though we're down slightly in material, I would still just snap up this knight, because we're going to be able to play knight takes C3 next move and then completely regain our material, so that seems pretty good. Well, not regain our material, but equalize the material, because then we'll have 2 pawns for it. So that looks pretty good to me. The only question would be after bishop takes knight, whether White can play bishop takes knight himself, because then we have the problem that we can't take on C3, so the option is to take on B2, where we'd be hitting this rook, but we'd be allowing bishop takes D5, which can potentially set us up in a load of pins. So as it is, White just immediately took back here. I think White really should have thought about that, because it looked pretty good for me. I just think White's playing a lot too quickly given the time control and given the material advantage and time advantage he has. He definitely should be spending more time, which would have allowed him not to blunder this pawn in the opening and then keep a material edge a bit later on. So the queen's under attack now, so I'd imagine just queen d2, because I think staying on this d line is beneficial. And I don't think there's any real advantage in going to the c file, because we can just support that with d4. And then we're looking to play e4, and then we've got the strong pawn center. We can push d3 later after protecting our knight. So I think queen d2 would have been better, because I think just d4 now, looking for e4 next move, We've gained a lot of space. We can bring this knight back into the game via, you know, any number of ways. I'd say via d7 to e4, e5 rather, d5. And then you can just play with moves like rook c8, queen b7 to push this bishop away, and then you got these knights here, and that looked better for black in my opinion. I don't really like the knight move back because it kind of tells me that black is a bit satisfied with the regain of material, and in a position where you have pawns and a piece for a rook, you definitely want to play aggressively with them, because rooks can kind of become very low value if you manage to get your pawns very close to the end of the board, because they're not great at stopping things unless they can get behind them. As played, I think what we now need to do is move our king off this line, like king e7 or something. Just because otherwise white's going to take twice on d5 and we won't be able to retake here because of the pin. Rook c8 wasn't a bad move, it's just that after queen d3, you know, this is the threat. And it doesn't hurt to have our king safer either. If white had played queen d2 like I suggested earlier, then you know, would have had this trap on without having to move his queen again. Queen b8 is played. This is playable because we're winning tempi on this bishop. So I didn't have the time to take on e4, because we would have recaptured, and then after captures we'd gain the piece here, which would be beneficial. So now that threat isn't on because the bishop's moved back, but I'd still be looking to push these pawns in the future, and to do that I feel like I need a safer king first. I need to play king e7, the idea of bringing it back here, or I need to play something like knight f6 back just to protect that pawn. Here it's like e4 is very weak, and I'd be very wary about sacrifices at points, because now we can just, well, I mean, the point is fusion's not threatening to take here because of because this pin's still against the king. So after the recaptures here, which is obviously the only move, white's gonna have to move his king, but if he just keeps it on the d-file, then he's got the situation where, yes, black has these central pawns, but now they're doubled and they're kind of blocked up. I feel like we wanted to keep that knight on we had and do this pawn expansion earlier. It can still happen, it's just going to be slower, which isn't necessarily good, especially when you've only got 2 minutes left compared to your opponent's 10. I think fusion's maybe a little bit too over-reliant on increment, just because that's what we're used to playing with when we play, because we don't like the idea of just you know, beating each other on time in a lost position. So d3 is played, but the problem I have with d3 is it means e4 is going to be permanently weak. Whereas if we kept this pawn on d4, it means that we also have the option of e3 later on, which maybe we're not going to play it, but it's also another pawn move in the centre, and I think we need to be putting our pieces in better positions. Actually, this f3 move is good. I like it because we're breaking up that pawn centre now. This d3 pawn's just too exposed. Whereas here is supported by the e5 pawn, which we're, you know, more comfortable with protecting. So okay, bishop d5, but now we've got a big problem after just takes, because as soon as this bishop moves, this bishop's under attack on e4, and once this bishop moves, d3 is in big trouble. I don't think white really wants to Well, I mean, he can't play bishop a7 because queen could take with check. The idea of that would be that he could take here next move, but of course the check stops that. But, you know, just a simple move, like bishop f2, like he's played. Seems alright. I guess black is maybe okay, because he can play just bishop g6, and then he can push e4 next move. But that, again, this bishop g3 is a nice move, because this stops the pushing whilst the queen's in this position. On queen b6 check, with the idea of bringing the queen in, maybe we just want to play bishop f2 back. Instead, fusion's going this way, which is also fine, I think. It's supporting d6 again, d3 rather. And you know, he still has chances in this position. If he can play something like queen d5, knight a5 to c4, obviously he has to be able to play knight a5 without being taken by the queen. And then after knight a5 to c4, he could push e4, e3. If he manages to get both these pawns on the third rank, then that's going to be probably more than enough to win the game, because this bishop we have to be given for one or two of the pawns, and then he's going to have the material edge. So maybe the way to support this knight a5, knight c4 thing is actually by queen takes a3, just picking off that pawn, which is probably the reason for this quick queen d6 instead of fire any other way. So I think Fusion actually found the best move there, but he needs to play super fast, because he's only got 35 seconds against 8 minutes. He plays an immediate check there, but... okay. So he's going for the trade of queens. Instead, I don't think this is the most accurate. I think, I mean, it's okay that he's got a pawn here now, but I think, obviously the best move for white was just to play rook d1 or something. And then he's threatening to take the queen, and due to this pin, he can't take back. As it is, he's got a pawn on c2, so he just needs to be able to get his knight in a position where it can attack these rooks. But it's hard, because this is a promotion square which is dark, and because he's only got a light square bishop, it's only his knight that can affect that, and b3 is covered by the a2 pawn, and d3 is awkward to get to, because this b4 square is covered and the e5 square is covered. Maybe he doesn't have to do it super quickly, but he does have to worry about this e5 pawn hanging. And, yeah, oh, some more moves have been played. For some reason I was stuck on that, so knight d4 was played, bishop just take e5, and now rook c4. It's white's move. But, yeah, so why is the option of taking the knight? Or just taking here. I think just taking the pawn is better, because there's no rush to take the knight, because the knight can't get to d2 without being taken. So yeah. By playing knight c6, Fusion's opened up rook takes here, which sometimes isn't the easiest move to spot. I mean, I think bishop f6 is the best move, just supporting it. Because at the same time this knight isn't going anywhere beneficial by moving back. Maybe knight f5 would have been more like attacking, because you're semi-threatening, you know, a bishop g3 check or something. But I guess the idea was that he was going to play this before break, which may be good, because now he's threatening to come to d3 or take on a2, which are both good. As it is, white's still going to win on time, I think, but actually it seems that Fusion's plan of knight c6 b4, that was actually pretty clever, because he's basically getting around that disadvantage which we mentioned earlier, that he couldn't get to b4. And he's doing it in a way that is not so obvious, because he was getting rid of white's double pawns to do it. White's just gaining some time with some checks, but now he's kind of run out of them. He's coming back here now, but just knight d3. Yeah, he can take an a6 check for one. But he needs to play something like bishop g5 here, so he can recapture the knight with his bishop. and block the pawn. If he just gives the rook for the pawn immediately, then I don't think that's the best exchange you can get, especially time-wise. So yeah. These checks are actually beneficial for Fusion, that if he can get his king to g3, he sets up some kind of mating net later on. Okay, and he should have taken the rook there, but I imagine he just pre-moved his king, but at the same time I don't know why you'd pre-move your king, because this is not an obvious move, because it's, you know, frankly bad. So we're just trying to see if he can overcome his time problems. He's allowed this now, which is super bad. He should just take and queen. But the problem with taking... Yeah, okay, is this move. So now he's covering his back rank, so that seems enough. And just king g2 here. King h2 rather. Prevents king g3. So it should be enough. Also, just based on the lack of time that Fusion has, under 5 seconds he could sack this rook for the bishop and be more than comfortable. It would have been really nice if he had just a little bit more time to see if we could make this attack work, because his plan was actually really good to break through here, because I didn't see any obvious way, and he managed to come up with that in very little time. But yeah, it was just too much early time, I think, on that decision between the queen c8 and queen b8 moves, and I don't think it was worth that amount of time. He's managed to pin the bishop now. If he can take that, then he can promote next move, but White can just give it. There's only got 1 second for Fusion. Oh wow, you can't see this, but yeah, if I move it you still can't see it. The guy actually resigned, this Alec guy, with Fusion having 1 second left. So, I mean obviously black is winning, since he managed to get that pin in. Which would win the bishop, but either this guy is just really good-mannered and knows that he's lost the game, or he just wasn't looking at Fusion's time at all because he had 1 second, so there's no way he was going to even get a draw in that position, so that's kind of crazy. But yeah, okay, so Fusion wins. Interesting game. I think it was misplayed in the opening. Both people were playing too... Well, especially Alec was playing too quickly in the opening, which led to him losing his pawn, which I can't believe is theory, because he didn't seem to have much comp for it. Then Fusion missed this, I think just rook b8, and, you know, he's pawn up for little compensation. As it is, he missed it. He spent, you know, 4 minutes on this move. But somehow he was able to get back the material and I guess win the game, so well done to him. It's not what I was expecting, you know, with this low time, but well done. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary, and I'll see you guys next time.